All good?
Lost print. There he is.
That's true. Okay, there's Leah. All right, it is 6:30 PM and I'd like to call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person, in consideration of the ongoing COVID-19 health concerns, we are offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in the meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature, and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak, and we will call on you shortly to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments or questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand but stay seated, and we will call on you to go to the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also, be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, would you please call the roll?
Thomas.
Here.
Boltinghouse.
Here.
Loudon.
Here.
Ryard.
Here.
Pring.
Here.
Inman.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Davis.
Here. Okay, our first item of business is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now on an item not on the agenda tonight? Okay, we'll now proceed with the agenda, and I would like to propose a small change to the agenda. For item number 8, we have a presenter here tonight to talk to us about the energy conservation codes, and I'd like to move that item up on the agenda if nobody objects. Okay, so we'll start with item number 8 and then resume the regular agenda from the top. That'll be the 2018 Building Code Adoption and 2021 International Energy Conservation Codes. And Brian Scott, would you please introduce the speaker for us? Yes.
So I believe the speaker is from KC Action Climate Change. Is there anybody from the development community or the construction community that was also invited to participate in this conversation?
Not to my knowledge.
Jeremy is also an architect with a commercial firm as well.
Right, but he's with KC Action Climate or whatever it's called. Is that correct?
Yes, he's also in the leadership of Climate Action KC,
Okay.
but he works at BNIM as an
So,
architect.
bias Then perhaps somebody else. Is that correct?
I would say he's knowledgeable. I don't know, as I can't speak as to bias.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we're back tonight to talk about the 2018 edition of the International Code of Building Codes. As I've iterated before, this is a family of codes made up of the building code itself, fire code, residential code, plumbing, mechanical, gas and fuel, the 2018 Energy Conservation Code, Property Maintenance Code, and the 2017 National Electric Code. So all of these codes are essentially created by the International Code Council. And the Code Council is a not-for-profit organization, and its membership is made up of building officials like Mr. Brown and architects like our guest tonight, and folks from the construction industry and the Home Builders Association, and basically all those trades that are involved with the entire construction industry. And they come together about every 3 years to create a set of codes. And it's a pretty rigorous process they go through. They have committees that evaluate amendments to each of these codes that are part of that family of codes. There's comments received. There's lots of discussions, and eventually amendments are made and things are adopted upon, and we have a new set of codes. Because that's done every 3 years, it's a little bit challenging for a lot of building officials to keep up with those changes. So we, not just being the city of Mission, but a lot of the cities in the Johnson County area do it every 6 years, every 6-year cycle. So we essentially skip a cycle, then we come back another cycle. The building officials will come together. When that set of code comes out, they will review the codes. They'll discuss possible amendments that are more applicable to the Kansas City area and the construction industry, particular to our metro area. They'll have hearings with, again, architects and folks from the construction industry to take feedback. They'll have a legal review. Then at the end of the day, they have kind of a set of amendments to those building codes. So the last time we did this was 2012, and that was a set of codes that we adopted. That 6-year cycle would be 2018 again. So we kind of went through that process. Pretty much a number of cities in the area have adopted the 2018 codes. We have not, just because we're a little bit lagging behind. That was one of the things that I charged Jim with when I hired him a few years ago, was to get the 2018 codes adopted. A lot of the folks that are now submitting construction documents to us on the design side, architects and engineers, are submitting construction documents that are designed or drawn to the 2018 codes. So a lot of folks are already kind of operating with that framework, the 2018 codes. So this would not be anything new to the projects that we're dealing with, or those that are coming forth before us. So I won't really get into the codes themselves. You've seen this packet a few times, and I think we gave a presentation before, so I won't belabor it too much. I know you have a guest speaker that you'd like to hear from tonight, so I'll just hand it off to him.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Laura, did you want to introduce the speaker?
Yes, thank you. So I know when we brought this forward to the committee, as Brian referenced, there were a lot of questions around the particularly the 2021 version of the energy conservation codes. And so the council was hesitant in that first opportunity when we brought it forward to consider the 2018 codes. So as Brian mentioned, since that time, there have been some changes. I think there are still several questions around the differences and some of the rationale and the interest in the 2021 version of the energy conservation codes. And so the request was made to invite Mr. Nall here this evening to help provide some of that context as the council wants to sort of evaluate the 2018 codes. I think it's important to note that the 2018 codes, in terms of the energy conservation codes in particular, are better, but only incrementally better than the 2012 codes. And I think, as Mr. Nall will share with us, I think there's a much more significant difference between the 2018 version and the 2021 version. The city of Kansas City, Missouri has recently gone through a process to look at and adopt the 2021 codes. And so we wanted to just have a better understanding as we continue and move forward in our code adoption process about some of the differences and what opportunities we might have. So with that, I have not had the pleasure of meeting Jeremy yet. We've traded a lot of emails over the last couple of weeks. But Jeremy, and I'll let you, I don't have your bio with me, but I know you work for BNIM, you're an architect, and you're working with the Climate Action KC group, but involved with a lot of other projects in the metro. And so he has a short slide presentation to share with us on the 2021 energy conservation codes, again, to help inform our conversations.
Good evening, everyone. While that's getting queued up, I'll just do a brief introduction. So again, Jeremy Nall, I'm a licensed architect with about 20 years of experience building both commercial and residential buildings. I also ran a nonprofit for about a decade, helping low-income residents in historic communities renovate their homes, especially around energy and access. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the 2021 Energy Code and why we would consider making a change right now in lieu of keeping with the 18. This is something that I'll talk about in terms of what Kansas City, Missouri has done and what the opportunity is here in Mission as well. So this is me. I'm an associate principal and director of sustainability and regenerative design at BNIM Architects. I work on projects all over Kansas City, nationally and internationally, and a lot of the work that I do balances between some high-end commercial, but also affordable housing, schools, and lots of other building types. I also did the Kansas City Zoo master plan and the polar bear exhibit, which were easy ones to convince people that they needed to be LEED certified. So I'm also a parent, and I live in Kansas City, Missouri, which I think I was supposed to say earlier. Sorry about that. So when this coalition came together a few years ago, it was right as Kansas City, Missouri was considering adopting the 2018 essentially as a raft of new building codes, not just the energy codes, but all of the codes. And so through the initial conversations there, this group formed really out of alliance. So professional organizations, some advocacy organizations, but really people that were interested in what a code could, what the next version of code could do, looking beyond just what was in the 2018, which, as was mentioned before, is a very incremental change compared to the 2012. And so this is what was adopted here recently. It takes effect on July 1st, 2023. Kansas City, Missouri has adopted the energy code alone. So the 2018 is the building code that governs new buildings across Kansas City, Missouri. But the energy code now will take effect is essentially leapfrogging to the 2021. After all of the legal review and everything, there are not conflicts in what's in the 21 compared to the 18 between the code versions. The other aspect that was, or the other piece of that code that was adopted is an appendix to it, which is called the zero code. So any building that wants to pursue net zero energy total, this simply gives the planning department a way to consistently measure how that's accomplished, whether it's done with on-site renewable energy and batteries, or an agreement with Evergy or your utility. There's some really clear ways, sort of rules of the road on how you measure a building that's pursuing that. And in addition to the 21, the weakening amendments that were part of the 2012 code in Kansas City, Missouri, which was making it, especially on the residential side, behave much more like the 2009 energy code. Those are all gone, those are struck. And instead we have two strengthening amendments that were adopted, including that all new buildings shall be ready for electric vehicles and ready for PV and storage, so photovoltaics on the roof. That doesn't mean that they have to be installed on the first day, just that you're running the conduit, you're sizing your electrical panels, and you're making the plans so that any future owner can easily and simply and cheaply make that change. Very, very simple to do, something that we do all the time in every building we touch. Not difficult or expensive. So why now? Why would we be talking about this right now? So as I mentioned, the previous versions of the code 2012, 2015, 2018 have only made about a 1% change in the total difference that is especially on the residential side in what a building built to the 2012 code would be compared to a building built to the 2018 energy code. Adopting the 2018 energy code, I feel like is kind of a waste of time, because it's so little has changed that it really doesn't do much for, it doesn't move the needle on energy almost at all. Whereas the 2021 code is taking about a 7% increase, primarily looking at the envelope of the building. So the walls, the roof, the foundations, how they're insulated and air sealed, what kinds of testing is required or optional even. And then also looking at the air conditioning system itself and how that works with those parts and pieces. So looking at it compared then to the 2012, that is closer to a 10% increase compared to the 2012 when you add up those little percentages along the way. So a few things that come with that. I'm talking about energy. I'll talk a little bit about climate later, but let's talk practically about what a building built with a tighter envelope, with more insulation means for a homeowner or for a renter. It means a building that's more durable. If there's a heavy freeze and a blackout, it means that building is less likely to have its pipes freeze, to have other cascading problems that can be more expensive over time, including the growth of mold in the walls. building to a more aggressive, especially envelope code means that you've got people who are homeowners who and renters who are able to stay in their home during a disaster and shelter in place for longer than somebody built that's living in a residence built to an earlier version of the code. So sheltering in place from a variety of types of demands. The other reason that we're starting to focus on this, I think, is around jobs. This is I've got to update this slide because it's getting a little old now, but this is just identifying some of the simple things in Kansas that homeowners can do to save energy. Things like drill and fill cavity insulation, improving your HVAC system, focusing on, especially around the base of the building, improving the R value or the insulation value around there. These are all things that come with that code. So these are built into this new version of the code, which means as we start to look at the jobs associated with that work, those are now part of the code. It's no longer an optional thing that happens when you renovate. It's something that as you build new, this is part of that work. So commercial updates, what are the differences on the commercial side going to the 2021? Again, and I'm going to compare this primarily to the 2012. So stop me if there's specific questions, but an energy improvement of about 10%, which relies on building enclosure changes. So again, the insulation, the air tightness of the building, the lighting improvements, really moving to LEDs as a standard. And frankly, as an architect, I've been doing that for the better part of 10 years anyway. It's not a hard thing. Leakage rate testing. So looking again at how testing, not just saying that you've got a tight envelope for your building, but actually testing it and proving out that it's meeting the requirements for air sealing. There's also some additional flexibility for builders to comply, whether it is, so there's a table of requirements that they can follow, which is simply following a required amount of insulation and air tightness, or there's a performance track where you can actually test the building at the end and make sure it's meeting the testing criteria. And then there's also the energy rating index, which gives a whole series of tables that are prioritized by climate zone for different types of solutions. So it actually gives builders a lot more choice in how they comply with the energy code than has been available from 2015 and before. And then finally, it comes with the zero code appendix. So again, it gives you the information about how to measure a zero energy project, if that's something that you could require at some point or tie to incentives. There's lots of ways that could take place. So just a little bit about the the renewable energy readiness and electric vehicle readiness. These are details from the code sections talking about how you size those, what they mean, running conduit, like how to measure those things. Again, neither of these are difficult things. When you're talking about adding solar panels and structural requirements to a residential roof, for example, our current structural code in the IBC already meets that requirement in our area. So it's not like we're adding more wood or materials to the roof. It's simply that you're running the conduit, you're sizing your electrical panel, and you're doing the work ahead of time so that you're not having to go back into a finished building later to add those fairly inexpensive parts and pieces. And same with electric vehicles. It's making sure that you've got the spots identified, you've run the conduit under the concrete, so you're not chipping up and interrupting the operation of a building later if you decide to add that kind of equipment. On the residential side, it's very, very similar list. We're improving the building enclosure. We're testing the leakage rate. Again, with lighting improvements, there is a slight difference here in the water heating size. So I live in the Brookside area, and my upstairs shower takes about 1.5 minutes to warm up because it's so far away from my water heater. And this is essentially taking the water heating system and making it slightly more compact so that your water heater is closer to your furthest fixture, or you've got a heat loop to connect the dots and make it so you're not wasting water while you're waiting for the hot water to finally get to your upstairs shower. And then again, on the right are the flexibility for builders to comply on the residential side as well. Not a lot of mystery or magic to how these things work. They're very clearly spelled out in the code. just to put some side by side, and I've shared this presentation so you can read the tiny little fine print at the bottom if you want to, but it's spelled out in the illustration here, just looking at what's in this was the Kansas City's current code with the amendments that they had, weakening it to act more like the 2009 code versus the proposal on the right, which includes all of the different options for how to comply. So it's not just an R13 wall, but it can still be a 2x4 construction. It doesn't have to be 2x6. It doesn't have to be 2x8. It doesn't have to be a structural insulated panel. There are lots of ways to comply with the requirements here. And then continuous insulation at the foundation. I've renovated a lot of homes in Kansas City, and the number one thing that an energy rater who's testing your home will tell you to do is to insulate the rim joist, which is the piece of wood around your bottom floor above your basement. That is the number one place where we lose our air and heat in all of our homes. Go downstairs tonight and see if you can see bare wood above either your limestone or your basement. And if you can, that's a great thing for you to do this winter, because that is one of the number one things that we can do in our climate zone to save energy. So the Department of Energy sets a whole series of cost comparisons, looking at the cost effectiveness of the investment to make an energy improvement. So you're spending a little bit more money on the envelope, on the outside of the building. And so what are some of the ways that we measure how that improvement is paid back for a homeowner, for a builder, for anybody? There are two primary methods that I'm going to illustrate here. One is on the left, which is the consumer cash flow, the cost benefit. So this is looking at everything from any kind of incremental change to your initial down payment, to your annual energy savings, any change to your mortgage rate or total mortgage, your net annual cash flow as a result of all of those things. And what we see, we're climate zone 4A here on the left, is that going from 2009 to 2021 is a 2-year cash flow positive for a homeowner. So it's not a 10, 15, 30-year thing that'll never pay back. It's actually very rapid. So on the top right here, table number 3, the simple payback period shows 6.5-year payback. And so that's only taking into account the initial cost. So any change in the cost of the building versus the simple payback in energy savings all by itself. So excluding all of the other data about the effect on your mortgage and other aspects. And neither of these take into account the escalation of energy cost year over year. So even at that, with the simple payback, it's only a 6.5 payback period. Before I go to the other two tables, I'll say that the Department of Energy and the National Association of Home Builders agree to the methodology on how they measure and account for the different savings. The Department of Energy uses both, and they express everything in both terms. The home builders tend to only use the simple payback, and their numbers that they'll use down here below, whereas we see these in the like $5,000 to $6,000 range, or more like $7,000 to $8,000. Locally, especially in Kansas City, Missouri, we had a lot of misinformation about that value, that additional cost value, that was extremely inflated. Any builder worth their salt will talk to you all day long about those numbers. So total single family construction costs, and you can see climate zone 4A, I've highlighted them here. Crawl space, heated basement, slab, unheated basement are all around or under $6,000 in difference in cost from the 2009. From a 2009 equivalent building, and then multifamily, it's in the $2,000 per unit range. So not an extraordinary amount of money. It's kind of almost the difference between, in fact, it's a little bit less than the difference between, do I want plastic laminate countertops or granite countertops for a home that I can stay in when there's a freeze. So the zero code. Again, this is not necessarily a required appendix. Kansas City has opted to include this as a voluntary appendix that is not required, but again, is training the planning department on how to measure this when it does come across their desk. And so it's very simple. Starting on the left, you meet the 21 energy code or better. And then there's two next methods. You can either use an energy simulation, or there's a pretty straightforward table that tells you what your energy offset is. The priority is to meet that on your building if you can, if you've got the space and the sun exposure for it. If that's not possible, or if there's not enough room based on the size of your building, then you can procure renewable energy from offsite. This is exactly the methodology that is being used by the Brookridge development, by the Kansas City Airport, by a number of other recent developers and developments that are seeking a net zero performance. This is exactly the methodology that we're using. So a little bit of context to back up and talk more broadly. Buildings in the United States account for a little bit more than 40% of the total emissions, CO2 or carbon dioxide emissions. That's not including any of the industry or transportation associated with the building materials that go into those buildings. That's only from keeping the lights on and running the air conditioning. In Kansas City, that measure in our 10 county region is actually 63% for buildings, almost evenly split between commercial and residential. So this is really the primary place where we have to make some changes. Looking ahead, doing nothing at our growth rate, and this I would say is fairly conservative growth rate. Doing nothing means that we're escalating our greenhouse gas emissions over time. Starting to take actions like more aggressive energy codes starts to help us pull that line down towards the agreements that are really necessary for the future of our communities. Along with that, the study I was just showing is the climate risk and vulnerability assessment for these 10 counties. And you can see, well, you can kind of see on the right that basically the darker the color, the higher the stress index, and it's not limited to dense urban areas. It really affects everybody all around the KC Metro. It's not limited to only specific zip codes. The risks and stresses are really broad, including mission. Another aspect of affordable energy is that by using less energy, you're also starting to take care of the affordability for those who are rent burdened and utility burdened. Low-income residents in the Kansas City metro area have seen an increase in essentially in how upside down they are for the energy burden, as rates have increased, as efficiency has remained stagnant. And so this is a place where if there's an argument about getting into a home, I think there's a counter argument about the affordability of staying in a home. If you can't afford a fluctuating utility bill that'll go up in the winter for gas and down again in the summer when your electric's going back up, the unpredictability of utilities is an enormous part of the displacement and exclusion of populations from housing. Looking again, this is one to update probably next year as we return to a more normal sales scenario in the Kansas City market. But in 2019, looking at all of the sales that happened in the greater Kansas City area, we found that of the 4,000 home sales, or I'm sorry, roughly 40,000 home sales, 91% of those were existing homes. These are buildings that were sold for an average price of $230,000 and are excluded from this new code unless you're doing a 50% or more major remodel where you're gutting a building down to the studs. This code does not apply. So you're essentially grandfathered in an older home. You don't have to make these upgrades unless you're making, again, a substantial more than a 50% addition on your home or stripping it down to the studs for more than 50% of the value of the home. Versus new construction homes, which went for an average price of $411,000 in 2019. I can only imagine what those are now. But even using the frankly silly numbers that were being thrown around how much more it was going to cost to accommodate building a more efficient and responsible home, that was still less than 3% of that total. Very small percentage of the total in new housing of the total home sales in the Kansas City area. Just to touch on it briefly, the Inflation Reduction Act is law. It takes care of about 2/3 of the total carbon reduction goals that we're seeking to accomplish by 2030. The remaining third is really up to councils like you to adopt better energy codes, to and create the programs that help homeowners and others fill that difference. And with that in mind, this is a consortium of different organizations. And yes, I do represent one of those organizations. But again, I'm also a professional, I'm a licensed professional, and that's the voice I'm speaking to you tonight through is through my professional experience. These organizations are already talking to each other and working very hard on behalf of Kansas City, Missouri, who has adopted these energy codes, because there's $1 billion of investment available for states and municipalities that adopt the new 2021 or later energy codes. 1/3 of that total is specifically for the 21 energy code. 2/3 of that is for stretch codes, by which they mean the zero code. So adopting it, even if it's not required, still means that you have access to some portion of that total value of dollars for training staff, for programs and contractor accelerators. There's, I think, a lot of opportunity coming in the next year associated with this. And that's only that one pot. If you look over at the individual and business incentives, it gets even more interesting there. And by simply meeting the code, those homeowners and businesses still have access to those same pots of money, but now it becomes sort of a more of a standard in our climate by going to a better energy code. So just to share a few of the usual and unusual arguments against moving to a better energy code. This will kill development and make Kansas City uncompetitive. We're going to keep building. There's demand where there's need, and better housing tends to have people that stay in it longer. Better buildings tend to have people stay in it longer and have the rents stay stable longer with a lower, with a higher occupancy rate. My very favorite is continuous insulation makes buildings wobble in the wind, which is so silly that I had to put it on here. That is absolutely not the case. Continuous insulation simply means that you've got a layer of continuous, typically a plastic insulation on the outside of the building. There's a simple bridging mechanism. There's actually dozens of ways to make that bridge to the outside face of the building that have no effect on the structural capacity of the building. This will kill the American dream. Okay. My favorite is I won't be able to sell fireplaces and barbecue grills. This is, and I think what that's getting at is the idea of this being an anti-gas or anti-natural gas code, which it is not. There's nothing about natural gas in this. That's not what it's affecting in any way. This is about the insulation and building performance, agnostic of your fuel source. So this is not about the war on natural gas or whatnot. And then the numbers that were being thrown around earlier this year were that this update will cost $32,000 per home. Scratching the surface of those numbers showed that $19,000 of that increase was in an air conditioning system upgrade. And I have never seen a single family home air conditioning system cost half of that amount, let alone that being in addition to the total. Just because I know it's on the horizon and I want to address it, the ICC. Yep.
I think we got a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to truncate a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I know we have a big agenda in front of us. I believe you're preaching to
end.
the choir. Okay. If you could just summarize quickly and we need to move on.
Okay. I'll jump forward then.
Thank you.
Sure. So this is the end of the slideshow. Just looking ahead to the 2024, because I know that's going to come up. That's an additional, right now what we're seeing in there is that it is actually going for even further beyond the 2021. So looking at the draft right now, it is pushing another 8 to 10% beyond. So not taking the steps right now, staying stagnant where you are makes a jump to the 24 that much more difficult to accomplish. And so taking this incremental step on the way to an even more aggressive code only makes sense for training and getting everybody up to speed. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions or discussion from the committee?
Not necessarily a question. I just had a comment. I just wanted to thank Jeremy for coming tonight. Very, very informative, very thorough. I think when this first came back to us in 2018 or first came to us in 2018 and we, barely scratched the surface of this conversation. For the 2018 code, we said, let's wait and let's talk about 2021. Well, before we even consider getting there, we felt like it was important to lay a strong foundation of what is going on in Kansas City, Missouri, what all of that has been about. Jeremy has been on the ground delivering this presentation to councils all over the metro, delivering the same information really across the board. So we felt like it was important, or I felt like it was important, and I believe others on council too, to lay a foundation of what 2021 is and why you may hear a push for it, why there is interest in it, and why, we would explore setting an aggressive timeline for 2023 to consider, pushing those conversations ahead. Thanks.
Anything else? Yeah, Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, I think before we have the discussion, if it would be possible just to place the action item, make a motion on the action. then
Yeah,
have the
I'll
Discussion.
summarize that up for us and make sure we're clear on what the action item is for tonight.
Thank you.
Certainly. Any other questions or discussion for Jeremy? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, good point, Ken. The action item on the agenda tonight is for adoption of the 2018 ICC codes, including the energy conservation code. So the 2021 code would be a point of further discussion as you read into the packet. Before we were going to make an action on that, Laura or Brian, did you want to sum up anything about the recommendation of the code, body of codes for tonight, or are we good to go? Okay.
And Brian can correct me where I missed the mark. You're right. So the action item before you is adoption of the complete body of 2018 codes. And again, staff fully recognizes that that is an incremental change as it relates to the energy conservation codes. What has also been included, but as I think as Brian referenced previously, many of the submissions that we're receiving are already at that 2018 building code level, because that's what most of the other cities in the metropolitan area, including Kansas City, Missouri, have adopted for the bulk of their building codes. There's also was a resolution that was included in the packet. One of the things that why we have been in part on a 6-year cycle is because the review of the codes and the conversations that happen throughout the metropolitan region are long and sometimes complicated. We, as a smaller city with a smaller staff, certainly have been in step with that 6-year cycle and wanted to fully understand the differences that might, or the potential conflicts. I think in Mr. Knoll's presentation, there don't appear to be conflicts based on what Kansas City has done to adopt 2021 alongside 2018. But I think we wanted to have a better understanding of that as staff as well, and to have an opportunity going forward in 2023 to really just be clear internally on what that is. So we included a resolution in the packet, which just would suggest that we would recommend adoption of the 2018 codes, and then passage of the resolution, which would commit us to an aggressive, as Councilmember Thomas said, review of the 2021 codes. I mean, it sounds as if, Kansas City adopted, but implementation is deferred until July of 2023. And so I think we would have time in this, initial, first quarter or so of 2023 to look at what that means for us, and then make some decisions about which code cycle to be on moving forward. So really two separate action items, although there are multiple ordinances to be adopted to get the 2018 codes in place.
Thank you very much, Laura. Are there any other questions or discussion? Councilmember Davis.
Just to comment, back in 2020, I think it was August or September of 2020, when we were talking about this, I had sought advice from Casey Cassius, who is also with BNIM architects about adoption of this, and he wholeheartedly supported this. He's a neighbor of mine and also is the building reviewer for the Homes Association and Countryside. I also know that our chairperson of the Sustainability Committee, Josh Theed, was also a proponent of adopting this 2021 code. So I am in support of us moving forward and not delaying on this process. So I would certainly lend my support of this action.
Is there any other discussion or questions?
Yeah, I did just want to make one comment on the resolution, because I assisted in drafting that. And I think what's important to note is that the resolution piece and considering the 2021 Energy Conservation Code and giving that a closer look during the next year is closely aligned to already past council priorities and actions. So we adopted support of the Regional Climate Action Plan, which includes recommending local governments adopt IECC 2021. I formed the Climate Action Plan Task Force. You saw in the information Jeremy presented that buildings are a huge piece of the emissions in our area. And so I think that, the consideration of 2021, not as an adoption action item tonight, but looking at that further and in greater detail on an accelerated timeline makes a lot of sense given the action we've already taken on this topic.
Councilmember Thomas.
There was a placeholder in the in the resolution for a specific month in 2023. And it looks like, Lori, you're looking for some direction on that from council, although I would defer to staff because you know what you can get done by when. But I would say, by Q4, October, really allow you time to, time to dig in and time to see KCMO past July and how that implementation's looking. So we don't feel like we're alone and hopefully then also have a better sense of 2024 as that rolls out as well.
Sure, I think, as I've talked with the mayor, I think we wanted to hear the discussion tonight, and we can certainly be positioned to fill in that blank when it comes forward to council next week.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, the first action item is on the adoption of the complete 2018 ICC code set. Is there a recommendation?
Recommend we take it to council.
Okay, anybody, not a non-consent, okay.
Consent.
And the second action item will be on the resolution directing staff to review the 2021 IECC. Is there a recommendation?
Same recommendation that we take it to council, non-consent.
Okay, both on the regular agenda. Right, that completes item number 8 from our agenda, so we'll go back to the top. Item number 1 is
Jeremy, thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation.
okay, the first few items all relate to the Nelson Treatment Facility reconstruction at 4800 Nall, starting with item 1, the preliminary development plan from the Planning Commission with Brian Scott.
Get a little PowerPoint.
Thanks for jumping around the agenda with me, Emily.
Okay, the Planning Commission met on the 28th of November. We had 8 items on the agenda, and 6 of them are going to the City Council for consideration on the December 21st agenda. 3 of those relate to the Nelson Wastewater Treatment Facility, which is located at 4800 Nall. We had a presentation from Mr. Patrick Denning last month with Johnson County Wastewater regarding improvements to the Nelson Wastewater Treatment Facility. It's approximately 70-year-old facility, and it's just kind of beyond its useful life anymore. So they're essentially reconstructing the entire facility to bring it up to modern wastewater treatment standards and make it compliant with state and federal regulations. So there's a preliminary development plan that kind of outlines how they're going to make those improvements. In a nutshell, a lot of the peak clarifiers and so forth that you see in this aerial photograph are going to be rebuilt in the very northeast corner of the facility. They have to keep the plant running while they're building a new plant. It makes it a little bit awkward. So they're going to decommission some of those things that exist right now, remove them, build new peak clarifiers and other operational equipment in the northeast corner. Then once they have that portion of it up and running, then they'll decommission the other portions that are kind of in the southwest of the site and remove all of those. They're going to build a new administration building, which is going to be located in the southeast portion, kind of that road that sort of connects to Nall on the south side of the site. And they're going to build a couple other administrative buildings. It'll probably be about a 5 to 7 year process while they build all of this. So there'll be a lot of construction activity going on at that time. We've had a lot of discussions with them about mitigating noise and construction activity and so forth. One of the things they're going to do is they're going to have electric cranes, those big arm cranes that we see on big construction sites. They're going to have a couple of those on the site, and they're going to be electric. So we won't hear any noise with cranes operating. Obviously, you're going to be working during daylight hours, not evenings or anything like that. There may be a little bit of noise with breaking up of rock and concrete and so forth. They've actually done a noise study to kind of measure conditions currently, and then we'll try to monitor that during the construction site. We did have a few residents that came, mostly I think kind of curious. They had a couple of questions about the impact, and Johnson County Wastewater was able to answer their questions during the public hearing and satisfy those. So that was approved for consideration by the City Council, by the Planning Commission. And we'll have the minutes in the meeting packet for next week. In conjunction with that, we also had a plat. As I said, the plan is 70 years old, and it's been kind of added on to over the years. The property's been acquired, and you can see the plat in your packet. It's just kind of a hobjob of different parcels of property. So we asked them to replat that as one contiguous parcel of property, and then just to kind of remove all those references, the old subdivisions and things like that are in there. So that was also submitted, and there was a public hearing held for that, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of that to the City Council. And then finally, special use permit. So we had a public hearing for the special use permit. There's a couple of stipulations that the special use permit will be valid for as long as they're operating a treatment facility at that location, that they'll be required to maintain all licenses with state and federal regulatory agencies, and then to maintain any odor control that they have on site. So those are all the items that pertain to the Nelson treatment plant. Yes.
I heard from a couple of Roland Park residents that were concerned about the construction parking limitations at Nall Park. And I was just seeing if any of those questions were asked at the Planning Commission meeting, or if there was any conversation that you've had with Joko about that concern.
We're going to try to keep as much of the construction parking on site. There may be some on Nall itself, but not necessarily on the park property. So I don't think that'll be a concern. But they have approached us about the possibility of having some parking actually on Nall itself. And there's really no activity on Nall other than those that go to the plant, go to the park. So there hasn't been a formal request yet. It's just a discussion at this point. There was a Roland Park alderman at the public hearing that just has some concerns about the impact on the park. She has been working with Johnson County Wastewater, so there's been some discussions there.
Anything further from the committee? Okay, those three planning items will go forward to the city council.
Yep, we had a couple plats too. One was for Azure Credit Union and one was for the shops of Benson. So it's pretty self-explanatory in the packet item there. So. All right, thank you.
Okay. And that brings us to item number 6. There's a drinking establishment amendment. And Brian, did you want to summarize that real quick, or Laura?
So we were done.
Yeah.
You were just like, just moving along here. I said, okay. So the final item that was on the planning commission agenda for the 28th was amendment to the MS1 zoning district concerning drinking establishments. I can find that. So we had talked a little bit about this at the last committee meeting. And essentially, the way the MS1 zoning regulations are currently written. So MS1 pertains to those parcel of properties that are along Johnson Drive. So it's just kind of that section from Lamar going east to Nall, a little bit past Nall to Birch Street on the north side of Johnson Drive. Sully's and some of those are in the MS1 zoning district. And the MS1 obviously is to promote a downtown activity. So it's retail businesses, restaurants, entertainment, etc. And permitted uses obviously include prepared foods for home and for eating, entertainment, convenience retail. Clubs and drinking establishments shall be allowed after issuance of a special use permit as provided for in chapter 445. And then there's some other stipulations that pertain more to zoning standards. And in particular, sale and consumption of cereal malt beverages or alcoholic liquor are prohibited except as follows. And it gets into food service establishments serving cereal malt clubs, drinking establishments serving alcoholic shall be allowed where the sale of food for consumption on the premises exceeds 30% of the annual gross income for the establishment. And that was a requirement of the county that was recently repealed by the voters. And provided that the exterior walls of the clubs and drinking establishments are at least 200 feet from the nearest residentially zoned property. And it doesn't really define what a residentially zoned property is. So that's created a lot of confusion with staff in terms of the application. We've had Sand Hills come through or Rock Creek or now Primrose. And the kind of questions come up about, well, does it require a special use permit or not? And what is a residentially zoned property? Does a locale count as a residentially zoned property? So we thought just to clear all that up, let's remove that requirement for the special use permit. And unless it's 200 feet from a residentially zoned property, and let's define what that residentially zoned property is. And that would be R1 through R6. So we're being very specific about what a residentially zoned property is. And we're not including the downtown neighborhood district. And so that thought being that that downtown neighborhood district is a transition zone between the MS1, MS2, and the single family residential areas that we see to the north and the south. So that was in there. And there's just some cleanup language in section 445 itself pertaining to the eliminating the requirement for the special use permit. And then our city attorney added a few little twists to the alcoholic portion of the code just to align with those provisions of the MS1 that we're changing to. So we had a public hearing for this. Nobody came. And the planning commission recommended approval to the city council. And that will be on your 21st agenda.
Okay, any questions or discussion?
Just a comment. We'll have full clarification by staff as to what these particular zoning elements are, correct? everybody will be on the same page in terms of what constitutes what from R1 to M1 to MS1. Everybody's on the same page then, right?
Right, we clearly define what those residentially zoned areas are. We know that's R1 is single family, R6 is the high rise district.
It,
Yep.
it seems like over the past year, we've had several people come forward where we're having to modify the zoning designation. So I'm just wondering how consistent, we can be in clarifying exactly what the intent is for the city, because we have had a bunch of modifications, especially on the apartment complexes.
Right, so we've had areas that we've had applications for projects in the MS2 zoning district. MS2 is really primarily for businesses with sort of an application of residential. And our feeling of staff was that for that particular land use, it's more appropriate to clearly define it as a residential, that being the downtown neighborhood district zoning. And that downtown neighborhood district zoning allows for a variety of residential type zoning from single family to multifamily housing. So within certain requirements and parameters of land use and so forth. So that's the reason why we made those recommendations for those zoning changes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, and I just want to clarify, Laura, this coming forward from planning, so no action on it tonight, despite the fact that it's an ordinance, right? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, it'll be under the
got it.
planning commission action items on the agenda.
Very well. Any other questions? Okay. So now we will move on to the action items for real. Item number 7, we have acceptance of the November 2nd Community Development Committee minutes.
Thank you. Draft minutes of the November 2nd Community Development Committee meeting are included for review and acceptance in your packet.
Any questions? Any objection to consent? Okay. Now we'll skip down to item number 9. We have consideration of a mowing services contract with Brent Morton.
Thank you. This is the 2023 mowing contract. Since 2010, we've been contracting out our mowing services. It's been a big cost savings to the staff that was required when we used to mow the parks and the right of ways and the equipment and the summer help. So there's been a drastic cost savings by contracting the service out and freeing public works staff up for more of their core duties, asphalt patching in the summer, stormwater cleaning, repairs, crack sealing, stuff like that. The current contract, we mow about approximately 60 acres. That's parks, facilities, some trimming on guardrails, and then some KDOT mowing, right-of-way mowing, and we also, that's about it, really. The city took the contract out to bid for the 2023 mowing season. We also took it out with a bid alternate for electric weed eaters and blowers for 25.8 acres. At the bigger parks, Waterworks Park, Mohawk Park, Streamway Park, City Hall, Anderson Park, and Broadmoor Park. The reason we selected electric weed eaters and blowers, after speaking with the contractors, the commercial electric mowers aren't available yet. And some of them are a year out and just nobody has those in their fleet yet. So it really wasn't feasible. We received 3 proposals. KLM was the lowest, most responsive bidder, and we've been using them ever since I've been here. We only switched one time and then we went back to KLM. They do a good job. They mow everything in basically a day unless they're doing right-of-way mowing, so they get through the city and they're not influence the parks or events on stuff like that if they're only here for one day. The contract is through, our contract ends this year with KLM, and then this one would start in 2023. We have an option to renew it till 2027 with a 3% increase each year. Up till kind of prices went through the roof, they kept the price pretty much the same. And then last year we went through a price increase just with how everything's going in the economy. So staff is recommending a contract with bid alternate for Kansas Land Management, an amount not to exceed $100,710. The current contract we have with KLM right now is $72,000, 870. And the additional funds for the electric equipment, we're recommending coming out of the sustainability funds allocated in the 2023 budget process. Be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, please.
If I read this correctly, having the electric equipment is going to cost this contract between $20,000 and $30,000 extra. Is that correct?
20,000.
$20,000. Okay. I have a huge problem with that. Especially after what Eller said today about our fund balance stabilization. The direction finder talks about how residents are really looking forward to having their sidewalks, streets, et cetera, done. I think that that is an unnecessary, unnecessarily funding apparatus as far as spending that kind of money for electric bid alternate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
Yeah, Councilmember Boltinghouse.
So I actually was the one that suggested we do this a year ago. The alternate just to consider, and I agree with Kristen. I am really happy we looked at it. I think it was really important to move the needle and, get a sense of where the market's at and learn. I mean, I've learned a lot just from talking to you about it the last year and kind of seeing where everything's at. So that to me was the win, just to kind of figure this out. However, I do think that going with the base bid makes the most sense on this. Just, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze for the benefits we get on the electrical piece. And I do want to thank staff, particularly for looking into this. It's been a really informative journey so far. I just don't think it's ready at the moment. So that's where I'm standing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, this contract we renew every year. So if 3 years from now, if more people are doing it or more cities and you see it more viable, you could always take the contract out to bid at the end of the season and try it again and see if we get better numbers.
Any other questions or discussion?
I recommend that we take it to consent.
You want to take consent, just the base bid? Okay. Thanks, Brent.
Yeah, no problem.
And our next action item is yeah. I didn't get any objection though. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Next action item with Brent is consideration of the 2023 turf management and chemical application contract.
Turf management and chemical application contract. Same thing since 2010. We've been subcontracting this work out, just staff availability and bringing them up just for more of our public work core duties, road maintenance and stormwater repairs and stuff like that. In 2019, we separated out the chemical application process and saw a significant cost savings. Most of the guys we use that bid on the mowing contracts will do it, but they do it as a significant up cost, and then just the companies that solely do chemical applications. So we've been separating out since 2019 and seen a big cost savings. If you look at the mowing contract bids, the one company that did bid on the mowing contract and the chemical application, it almost doubles the cost. We've had good luck with True Green. We do about 40 acres. So the KDOT right away, we don't really treat that for weeds or any kind of fertilizer. It's just kind of the knockdown phase since we do it once a month. So it's all our parks, facilities, green spaces and stuff like that, that we just want to maintain, keep looking nice for the city. Went out to bid for this one as well. True Green came in as the lowest, most responsive bidder. We've had good luck with them. They've also been able to do some side projects with maintain some trees on Johnson Drive and the Mayor's Christmas tree and have those services in-house for that kind of chemical application. Right now, the 2022 contract is for $12,429. We're recommending a contract with True Green for $16,620. And it's the same as the mowing contract. It's through 2027, 3% increase, but we renew that contract every year. So if we're ever not happy with the services or want to go a different direction, we always have that opportunity. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Recommend we take it to consent.
Thank you.
Okay. Take that to consent. Thank you, Brent. And action item number 11 tonight, consideration of a joint use agreement between Water One and the City of Mission from Penn Almany.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this is a continuation of a discussion we had back in October of a joint use agreement between Water One and the City of Mission. Water One owns the pumping station on 5900 West 53rd Street, as well as some of the green space that we know fondly as Waterworks Park. We've been in agreement with them for over 40 years, which is great without incident. They were partnered with us and actually had a representative on our stakeholder committee. His name was Hanley Barker. He's the facilities and engineering manager at Water One. And so through every step of the conceptual redesign of Waterworks Park, we've had a representative there to kind of guide some of their infrastructure concerns and make sure that we weren't overstepping any of our lease agreement elements. So a conceptual design was proposed and reviewed by the public as well as Water One on September 2021, and then informed the final design, which was presented in January of 2022. Like I'd mentioned, Water One was supportive throughout the entire time. They worked with city staff to make sure that all of their concerns were resolved. And then Water One and Payne and Jones legal teams reviewed the current amended joint use agreement that's before you today. So if you recall, during the October meeting, there was a concern about some of the potential confusion within Section 5 of the joint use agreement that really resolved around who was responsible for what elements in terms of cost, culpability, if there was a leak in the underground infrastructure. And so this section really resolves any questions. And their primary concern from Water One was they didn't want to have to replace any landscaping elements, particularly in the northwest corner, where it seems that all of their infrastructure kind of gets the most dense. So are you interested in me reading that portion, Section 5, or do we feel confident? Okay, I feel like you guys have a good grasp of that. So staff is recommending approval of the amended joint use agreement between Water One and the City of Mission from this point moving forward. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I see no questions. Is there a recommendation?
Yeah, I believe the mayor was the individual that brought this up. Are you comfortable with this?
Yes, I like the revised language better than the original language. Thanks for the work on it.
You're welcome. Definitely remove some confusion.
Yeah.
Okay, recommend that we take this to council. I'm fine with consent, but it's up to the rest of the group.
Any objection to consent for this? Okay. Thank you very much, Penn.
Thank you.
Next, we have consideration of a greenhouse gas inventory contract award with Emily Randall.
Thank you very much. I'm here to present as a result of our request for proposals for an update of our greenhouse gas emission inventory. The inventory was last done in 2008, as I know you all are aware. We have postponed once the council approved funds for an update to that inventory. We've been slow to initiate, but did issue the request for proposals in October. Received 4 proposals back. We had a review committee that included myself, Councilmember Chosey, City Planner Carrie Kneller, and Josh Thede from the Sustainability Commission. We heard interviews virtually from all 4 firms. Excuse me. And had a really great discussion, pretty unified response across the scoring, and are recommending to you that we go with Lotus Engineering and Sustainability. We were very pleased with their approach to the work. They specialize in these inventories specifically. So we felt like they just, this is their bread and butter, the thing they spend the most time on. They really brought to life, for me in particular, and I think the full group, the transparency in the data review that they do, and also the customization that they offer on the outside when they're presenting the data. They offer us the option of infographics, story mapping. They really show us behind the screen of their data and the formulas so that we are empowered and trained to update our own data going forward. To me, it really felt not like something that is an issued report and then goes onto the shelf, but something that we will fully understand by the time we're done and can really be more in control of how to use it going forward. And I'm hopeful that when we present the data, I know there's very large interest in the community, and I'm hopeful that they can help us kind of showcase and educate on the back end of why we do this, what might our next steps be, et cetera. So the scoring was tight between them and Black and Beach, who did our original inventory. But I think just weighing all of the factors, that sort of realness pushed Lotus over the top. And since our review committee concluded their work, I've heard from several of the Lotus references, and they have been rave reviews. Many people are using them for updates, but also have customized the data that they initially received back from Lotus, but just really lots of really strong endorsements from them as well.
Yeah, Councilmember Davis.
Emily, thank you. Do you know, did they speak to the issue of comparison to the 2008?
Yes, they did. We asked that of all of our firms. We really care about that quite a bit. And I believe that when we come out of this process with Lotus, we'll have a greater understanding than we ever did of the 2008 data, but I think they will be able to, they really spoke a lot in the interview to if they are forced to make an assumption, walking us through which assumptions they make and trying to close that gap as much as possible. That's what I really think their skill is in no false moves. So they're going to take what they can get, which now, we were comparing that utility information, for example, so much more digital and available in more concise ways. So I think there's just going to be an ease of it just with technology improvements since 2008. But if they have to make a leap, I think we will be fully aware of what they've taken into account in order to do that.
How does this relate to the FCIP? For this facility,
Yeah.
as well as the other elements of that process?
Yeah, what we've talked about in the review, but also in the Climate Action Task Force work, is that we think we'll see quite an improvement. I don't know if that's what you mean, but I think that the improvements that we have made across all fronts really will show in the data, and I hope that we are pleased with the progress that we've seen. While we haven't been measuring, we've been busy, and I think that will bear out in the numbers.
And last question, what do they recommend is the period with which we repeat this in the future?
We did not talk to them about recommended frequency. The Climate Action Task Force did recommend a 3-year update. When the task force presented to council, there were initial recommendations. We haven't codified that or sealed that, but that was part of their recommendation.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, is there a recommendation?
Yeah, I recommend that we take this to council, non-consent.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much. And item number 13 is consideration of a streetlight extension policy with Celia Duran.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I know you've seen this item a couple times, so I am happy to go over our procedures that we follow when somebody requests a street light, or we can go straight to any specific questions you have.
Anybody want to review that policy or questions or discussion?
Come on. Just kidding.
Okay, is there a recommendation for the extension policy?
Recommend that we take it to council consent.
Okay. Okay, and the final action item is a streetlight installation contract award.
So this is our first chance to implement the new policy that you're going to approve. So we received a request from a resident to evaluate whether there was adequate lighting on West 60th Terrace, just east of Nall. As you go around the corner, there's a real dark spot there. And I just noted that my staff report is incorrect because it says that there's only one existing streetlight on 60th, but there's actually two, which I'm sure Councilmember Choicing noticed. So basically, we sent the request to our on-call engineer to evaluate using this procedure. And based on their evaluation, they determined that there was a dark spot as you go around the corner just east of Nall. And while they looked at that, they also noticed that at the next intersection at Rosewood and 60th Terrace, there was also a small area that was dark as well. So we requested a bid for street light installation from Black and McDonald for those two locations. And they recommended the one on the corner close to Nall, and then one at the corner of Rosewood. And then Councilmember Choicey requested that we reevaluate that because, it's actually darker. It has some lighting, but it's actually darker further to the west. And so I went out there and drove that night, and I was like, oh yeah, you are correct. And so it's going to cost a little bit more if we move it down to the next property line, but I think it probably would be a better option. I did talk to Black and McDonald. I tried to get them to revise the quote, but the person in charge is on vacation till the beginning of the next year. So I'm trying to get a cost for that additional extending the conduit and cable. And I hope to have that next week if that's the direction we want to go.
Okay, before I jump in, any questions or discussion? Celia, are the two proposals independent? We could adopt either one of them. Okay. Just in the interest of sort of financial efficiency here, my main concern would be with the westernmost light where you're turning off of Nall. What is your opinion as, on the second light recommendation and the necessity of that? And I know safety plays into it, but that's not one that jumps out at me as critical.
I agree. The one that when you turn the corner is a lot more critical because you're driving on a lighted street and then all of a sudden it's dark. The next one over, I mean, they pointed it out and there is a street light on the Rosewood on the cul-de-sac to the north that provides some lighting. So I don't think it's really as critical either. And in fact, sometimes when you install more streetlights than everybody else wants them, because then they see this is more light. Why didn't I? And so I did kind of worry, like, what are we setting off by doing this? But it does show that there is an area that doesn't meet the lighting. But yeah, we can come back. I mean, this is our contractor that does all our streetlights, so we can come back, in the future if we need to.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to second guess the safety or the numbers of the process, but it doesn't seem as cost efficient to me for the second light. So
yeah, you have to pull the conduit a lot farther, so it's more expensive. I'm okay if you're all okay just installing at the first location.
that would be my preference, but I want to make sure that the committee's okay with that. Any objection to just the first light on the western corner? Okay. And we'll do that on, I think consent is okay.
Consent.
Okay.
And one thing I wanted to note is that I sent out letters to everybody, and the one closest to the corner, there's a power pole right there. So we're going to have to work on how far away it is from that. And so hopefully the property owners, we like to put it on a property line, but we can't because there's a power pole. So hopefully there aren't any issues, but I'm waiting to hear from them as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. So that'll be just the one light on the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the action items for this evening. We have no discussion items on the agenda. Ms. Smith, are there any department updates for the Community Development Committee? Okay. With that, it is now 7:48 p.m. with no further discussion. That concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is now 7:49 p.m. and I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person in consideration of the ongoing COVID-19 health concerns, we are offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the City Council calendar and on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in this meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you to come to the lectern and make your comment verbally. Please remember your questions or comments are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of your in-person group tonight, please raise your hand, but stay seated and we will call on you to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also, please be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. And please contact the admin offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, please call the roll.
Thomas, Boltinghouse,
Here.
Loudon,
Here.
Byard,
Here.
Kring,
Here.
Inman,
Here.
Josie,
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Thank you. We do not have any public presentations this evening, so we will now proceed to our regular agenda. The first item is the acceptance of the meeting minutes from Robin Folks.
Thank you. Draft minutes of the November 2nd Finance and Administration Committee meeting are included for review and acceptance in your packet tonight.
Recommend taking those to the consent agenda.
Mhm.
The next item is consideration of the 2023 legislative priorities from Ms. Laura Smith.
Yes, good evening. And I know we have Stuart Little with LGR online joining us this evening. So welcome, Stuart. As you know, for the last several years, we've prepared a legislative program and legislative priorities in advance of the legislative session to help us communicate those things which are important to this governing body and our community as they are taken up and discussed and considered during the legislative session. So the program that was included in your packet mirrors in many ways the 2022 program. I didn't have any additional feedback from members of the city council from the time we presented this as a draft and a discussion item until tonight. So we have looked at this. Both Stuart and Mallory with LGR have reviewed this and didn't have any recommended changes or additions based on what they anticipate the important issues to be in this upcoming legislative session. So it's presented tonight for your final consideration and discussion, and then it will be disseminated, posted on our website and shared with our legislators.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee about this item? Questions for Stuart? Is there any objection to putting this on the consent agenda?
Agree.
All right, thank you.
All
And
right.
thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Stuart. All right, our next item is consideration of an ordinance adopting the 2023 budget, also from Ms. Smith.
Yes, the next two items on your committee agenda are really housekeeping items that we present each year. The first is just one formally adopting the annual budget. As you know, we do that each summer. But this just allows us to adopt that budget by ordinance. We have no changes to the proposed 2023 budget that the council adopted this past September. So we would recommend approval of that ordinance.
Any objections to consent on this one either?
No, that's fine as long as that's acceptable.
Yes, that's fine.
All right.
And then the second is a resolution, just basically authorizing the city administrator to spend according to that 2023 budget. Again, this is really more of an administrative sort of housekeeping item. And as you know, the expenditure limit provided to me by our codes is $10,000. So even though it is an item or a piece of equipment or a project that is approved in the 2023 budget, it still comes back to you if it exceeds my expenditure authority set by code.
Comments? Yeah, Debbie.
I move that we take these, anything budget wise, I think needs to be on non-consent though.
So we'll move that one to the regular agenda. And then our fifth item this night is with Brian Scott. It's amendments to the 2022 budget.
Okay, now that we've adopted the 2023 budget, we need to amend the 2022 budget. And we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year, and we're kind of looking through the books and realize that a couple of funds, we actually exceeded our budget authority. So you'll all recall that when we adopt a budget, there's a set of state forms we have to complete. That's our official budget that we present to the county. And those state forms actually set the authorized expenditure amount. So we can't exceed that authorized expenditure amount. And if we do, we have to amend the budget. And that's true with a couple of funds for 2022. And that is the street sales tax fund and the TIF fund. And with the street sales tax fund, we were not sure if the street sales tax would be renewed by the voters. So when we budgeted in 2022, we took a very conservative approach. And we just kind of brought in what we thought would be the revenues for the year, based on that 3/4 cent sales tax we're receiving. We took out the debt service, and we left enough in the fund balance to pay for that final debt service in 2023 if the sales tax was not approved. Luckily, it was approved, and it was approved at a higher amount, in which we started receiving that additional amount. And we were able to kind of use that fund balance and apply that to street projects. So we did that with the 2022 street preservation project. So that kind of exceeded our budget authority. And then the TIF is just kind of a weird anomaly with the state forms. So that I can't predict what we're going to get in property tax kind of based on the way those forms are. It's the formula in the form. For 2023, we're using a different set of state forms, so I'm gonna be able to do that in the future. So probably won't be doing that again, amending that, but anyway, we took in a little bit more revenue in the property tax for TIF than we anticipated. So we're asking for an approval from 716 to 785. So that's 716,000 that was authorized in 2022. We're wanting to amend that to 785,000. We'll have a public hearing at your meeting on December 21st, and you'll hear the same spiel from me again. We'll ask that you approve the amendment.
What options exist, Brian, if it doesn't go through?
That's a good question. I guess we'd have to, I don't really know. You can't modify your expenditures on the
Already
TIF.
done, right?
The sales tax, I don't think we can account for those expenditures anywhere else. Because we've expended in capital improvement. And those are really our only two. General fund, you can kind of offset those expenditures in the general fund. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Recommend that we.
And I
take-
think that the one quick question would be, again, it kind of goes back to just the existing expenditure authority. So anything that has been expended from that fund where we're asking for that increase in expenditure has come to you all for approval. So, and I suppose on a TIF fund, we might be able to sit on it at the objection of a developer until it got caught up in some fashion. But again, it's always a little bit of a gamble at the beginning of the year, and these two in particular, just with the unknowns when the 2022 budget was put together. And we can do a better job of sort of signaling throughout the course of the year if we think we're going to have those budget amendments, but they still fall all within the parameters and other fiscal controls that you have.
Recommend we take this to non-consent.
All right, regular agenda. Great. All right, Brian, we have you for a few items here. The next item is renewal of the workers' compensation coverage from the Kansas Eastern Regional Insurance Trust, known as CARET. You could talk to us about that.
Okay, yep, the city belongs to CARET, and it's an insurance pool that provides workers' compensation insurance for municipalities and governmental agencies in eastern Kansas. We've been a member since 2009. We received our premium renewal officially yesterday at the annual meeting, and it is $138,980 for 2023. And I will note that this has actually gone down from previous years. So not to get too far into the weeds, but a few years ago, we had some pretty severe injuries, not so much frequency, but severity. And those have kind of dropped off. And so that experience mod has kind of dropped off. And then we've gotten real aggressive about safety awareness in the last few years. So I want to credit Emily and Kathy Stratman for sort of reinvigorating our safety committee. We meet on a quarterly basis with a safety team, representatives from each of the departments. And we talk about safety matters and renewal. We review any significant claims that come through. And then the department directors too have taken a real serious position on creating a culture of work safety for our organization, and providing opportunities for safety training. And I think that's really kind of stuck with the employees. And so you see that here in reduced premiums. So give credit where credit's due.
Any questions on this one? Is consent agenda all right?
Consent is fine.
All right. Okay, Brian, our next item is property casualty and general liability insurance.
Yeah. So we have had coverage on property and liability with travelers for the last few years. Unfortunately, unlike workers' comp, that has been going up. And we were presented with a renewal rate recently of $168,906 for the property and the liability side. Cyber liability was renewed, or we were presented with the renewal with Cowbell for $17,509. So that remains pretty steady for what we got the previous year. But the property and liability has really gone up. And the big driver of that is the property side. One would think it'd be liability, maybe law enforcement, but it's actually property. And it's something that's going on industry-wide. I actually got a little flyer today from C-Business competitor Lockton. We had some pretty good information in there. 24.3 billion underwriting losses for the first 9 months of 2022. And 2022 Atlantic hurricane season was the third worst on record, resulting in 110 billion losses. Hurricane Ian was almost $50 million alone. So a lot of that is kind of driving the property side. We're also seeing, the issues we hear about with inflation and supply chain. Those are also driving property insurance issues in terms of claims and being able to get things repaired or replaced in a timely manner. So it's really impacting across the board, the insurance industry. We're fortunately seeing the repercussions of that. So I do have with me tonight, Tom McGuire, who's with CBiz. He's our broker on property and liability. So he can answer any questions that you might have. Since you made a trip out here, you might as well ask him a hard-hitting question. Like, why is he not wearing socks in December? I thought he was a developer when he came in here,
I'll ask a question just for kicks. Make it feel like you didn't waste your trip if you want to come up. Yeah, all watching for the socks. So I had a question on the property premiums, because from what I've seen, the extreme weather events are only going to keep getting worse. Do you see the industry and the rate increases capping out or topping off at any point? Or are we just going to keep seeing these year over year large premium increases?
That's a really good question. So it's kind of twofold. I do, there's no doubt that it doesn't appear that any of the weather related claims are slowing down at any rate. What we can say is that the insurance carriers over the past 4 to 5 years have really increased what they're charging the end user in premiums. So hopefully at some point we're going to get to a point where they're collecting enough premium to surround those risks, but we are not there yet. And I'm not expecting 2023 from a rate standpoint to be any better. It'll be worse than 2022. So in the near term, no, we're not expecting rates to level off, but at some point, the theory would be they'd start collecting enough that they'd be able to actually have a profit on the property line. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question or comment on this or a recommendation?
Yeah. One last thing that I will say, just because you asked that question, and that it's being, it's worse in Kansas because we have a shortage of insurance carriers that are willing to write property at this point. And so that's kind of exasperating the problem a little bit, is that there's not a lot of insurance carriers that are willing to write at this particular time. So
Any objection to putting this on consent?
No,
All right. Thank you for that.
thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Appreciate that. The next item is renewal of the interlocal agreement with Johnson County Department of Technology and Innovation for computer network support with Brian.
So we rely on the Johnson County Department of Information Technology, DTI, for network support. That's for citywide, both the city side and the police department side. We've been having a relationship with them since 2011. They presented a proposal for us this year of a total of $64,720.25 for 2020. No, excuse me, that was 2022. 2023 proposal is $69,929.06, which is an 8% increase from 2022. And that is for general city, which includes City Hall, Public Works and Community Center, 26,970. Then the police department's 42,958 for a total of 69,929.
I recommend putting this one on the or on the consent agenda
Agree.
as well. Okay. Then our last item tonight with Brian is consideration of recommendations for the deposit of alcohol tax funds to be used to support the United Community Services of Johnson County's Drug and Alcoholism Council, known as DAC.
Okay, so state of Kansas statutes imposes a 10% liquor drink tax, aka the alcohol tax, on the sale of any drink containing alcoholic liquor sold by clubs, caterers, or drinking establishments. Now, the revenue derived from this tax is allocated 30% to the state and 70% to the city or county where the tax is collected. The state statutes further stipulate that for cities the size of Mission, the portion of the allocation to the local jurisdiction be proportioned in thirds, with 1/3 to the general fund, 1/3 to a special parks and recreation fund, and 1/3 to a special alcohol tax fund. The special alcohol tax fund is to support programs whose principal purpose is alcoholism and drug abuse prevention or treatment of persons who are alcoholics or drug abusers or are in danger of becoming alcoholics or drug abusers. It's straight from the state statutes. So the alcohol tax funds allocated to the city of Mission are estimated to be $375,000 for 2023. Yeah. That has been steadily going up for the last few years. I don't really know why, other maybe we just have more drinking establishments than we did a few years ago. So if we divide that by 3, that'd be $125,000 to each of the general fund, the special parks fund, and the special alcohol tax fund. We're proposing that a portion of this money go to pay for the co-responders and then support their activities of the police department. And that would leave about a balance of $60,000 that would be allocated to the special alcohol tax fund to support those programs I just mentioned. And the Drug and Alcoholism Council, which is supported by the United Community Services of Johnson County, kind of works with all the cities in Johnson County to sort of collate those funds and support those programs. So they solicit grants from agencies in Johnson County that provide those services to Johnson County residents. And then the funds that they receive from the cities go to pay for those services. So we would ask that we support the allocation to the Drug and Alcoholism Council in the amount of $60,000 for 2023.
One quick point of clarification. I know when we went through the budget process, we talked about sort of the DARE program and the support of that. And I think what we agreed was that we want to support that education and awareness in the schools, maybe not necessarily through the DARE program. So the same resources. But I know that was an important conversation the council had earlier this year.
Yeah, Councilmember Shows.
Yeah, that prompted me to read up a little bit more before on this topic. And from what I understand, just briefly looking at the literature out there, the new revised DARE program seems to be pretty positively received by anybody that I would care about their opinion anyway. So I don't object to that necessarily.
Any other comments on this one? Yeah, go ahead.
I just have one comment for 2023 and potential use of the special alcohol tax funds. I saw recently in the Shawnee Mission Post that Overland Park PD is going to begin carrying Narcan. I know I've had some very in passing conversations with Chief and with Laura on that. And I would just ask that that maybe be something that staff would look at for 2023. There's a big multi-article series, long form journalism in the Washington Post this week on the fentanyl crisis. And it does seem like a real way
Funding source for that.
we could have
Yeah.
an impact. Yeah.
Either that and or we have the opioid settlement funds, which are coming in. We agreed to participate in that. Several communities in the metropolitan area pooled their funds through UCS. We opted not to do that because we think our allocation is going to be relatively small. But I know we have had ongoing conversations about particularly the Narcan. So we will have, at least initially, I think, as Brian mentioned, a different funding source for that.
Yeah, and just one final comment as a coda to those is I'm really happy to see the mental health co-responder program in this too. It's just really a point of pride and reminds me to get with Dan at some point too and kind of talk to him about some lessons learned and how it's been so far too. So I'll put that on my list. Any recommendations on where to take this item?
Consent.
Consent. All right, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Our next item is consideration of the cereal malt beverage licenses for 2023 from Robin Folks.
Thank you. City ordinance and Kansas statutes require that any person or business wishing to sell any cereal malt beverage or enhanced cereal malt beverage, CMB, at a retail location must obtain an annual license. License renewals happen at the end of the year, and the license is good from January 1st of 2023 through December 31st of 2003. The following mission businesses have submitted license renewal applications to me: CVS at 6300 Johnson Drive, Hy-Vee Grocery Store at 6655 Martway, the Hy-Vee Convenience Store at 6645 Martway, Quick Trip at 4700 Lamar, Target at 6100 Broadmoor Street, Polly D's Pizza at 5735 Johnson Drive, and the Corner Lalo's Kitchen at 5038 Lamar. Every applicant submits an application and a fee to my office, and then the licenses are issued after background checks are completed by the police department and Chief Madden. Happy to answer any questions.
Recommend consent on this one?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. That takes us out of our action items, and we do have one discussion item this evening. It's about the governing body compensation from Laura Smith. Ms. Smith, will you please provide your report?
Yes, thank you. I think we learned last year in some conversation that by our city code, the council is to review council governing body compensation each year in January. We hadn't really done that comprehensively since 2002. We brought forward some survey results last January, as we talked about that for other communities here in Johnson County. And we thought we would tee this up as a discussion item now in the event that the council would want to consider it as a potential action item in January. So we wanted to get this back in front of you. We reached out and there really were no updates to any of the compensation numbers that were provided last year. So that information was included in your packet. I had to chuckle because Robin is so thorough. She texted me and wanted to make sure that the mayor's salary in Edgerton wasn't a typo. And I assured her that it was not.
You could blame her for thinking so.
90,000. Absolutely. So I appreciated that. Anyway, we're just here to kind of get this back in front of you. I think we said, and we talked some at the retreat about bringing it back at the end of this year to kind of talk about options. And so just open it up for discussion and further direction for staff.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you. I don't know who's managing. I've shared this before and I really appreciate the chart. Thank you so much for this. I'd like us to see us move to Edgerton's levels. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke, obviously. I know that we've got a mixed bag here and, you know, you got some cities that are way bigger and way smaller compensation, some cities, you know, less and more. And I think that it'll always be that way. And I know that we have differing philosophies on council in terms of volunteerism and whether we all should be compensated or not. I personally feel like Mission is a very diverse city that we need diverse representation on, and oftentimes that requires compensation for what I believe is to be a job. And I think this is a job that we do. I think that's been established in what, you know, what we've seen in the past, not since 2002, of course. But so I would like to see us maybe look at where Merriam and Roland Park is, I guess maybe more Merriam. I obviously that wouldn't be like if we were to take where we were in 2002 and go, you know, just with inflation numbers, that might be a little wild. I'm not looking for anything like that, but I do think for us to be able to allow for council members to come to these meetings and afford a babysitter and afford travel and do the things that are required with this job, I think we need to compensate them fairly. And if any other council members feel like, you know, they believe in that volunteerism aspect, I know that we've had council members over the years donate their check back to the city. And I think that's always a fantastic option for council members to do as well. So that's my 2 cents. I know that not everyone may be on the same page, but thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. I do see Councilmember Loudon has her hand up online, so feel free to share your piece.
Sure, thank you. You know, I agree with what Council Member Thomas has said. You know I view this as a second job. To do this job well, I spent a lot of time reading and preparing, and I've been trying to go to as many events that will help me to learn more about doing this job well. And it does take me away from my family and takes me away from being able to actually have a different second job. You know, we are a working class family, and so I appreciate, you know, and didn't even know when I ran that it was a paid position. But now that I've done it for a year, and just to think that, you know, this was set 20 years ago and it's not been changed since, I do think that we should have some conversations on raising the compensation. When you look at some of the other cities that are wealthier and they don't really take money, or they take $2 and donate it back, I'm sure that they have the money to do that. And that's great. But I do think that, you know, this is a lot of working class people live in this city. A lot of people, in order to spend the time that it takes to do this job well, would need to be compensated. And so I do think that we should look at, you know, making some changes.
Thank you, Councilmember Loudon. Anybody else have a comment on this? Yeah, Councilmember Chosen.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I think we should do what we can to ensure that the lack of you know fund, or the salary is not a barrier to entry for somebody that doesn't have a lot of resources. I think that should be the main goal for us. So I would support looking at, you know, however that stacks up with what we're doing now.
All right, any final pieces? Yeah, go ahead.
I would just ask Laura if you have any, you know, we always look to you for guidance. You know, if there's, you know, maybe not everyone is fully, you know, putting in their 2 cents, but if, you know, you have an idea of if we were to explore what that would look like, you know, what is that range you're thinking, or is that something you just want to hold till January and you wanted to know that we wanted to continue the conversation?
I think a couple of things. I think it's a tough position, and as I've told the mayor, I don't think it's appropriate for staff to recommend council compensation. We can certainly collect the data and share that back. And as you mentioned, there is, and will always probably be, varying philosophies about that compensation. I think consistent with at least what I heard last January, and to a certain degree what I'm hearing this evening, that potentially something, you know, similar to an annual adjustment tied to maybe what is being provided to employees. Or something, you know, tied to a CPI might be an appropriate index, something that would be easy to communicate via policy. And you could always elect in a particular year, you know, if we're reviewing it annually, you could always take action on that each year. So I would be happy to come back in January with kind of Miriam does not have a formal written policy. I've talked with them to see if there was something that we could sort of steal or mirror the language on. And they don't have that. But I would be happy to kind of, you know, bring forward something for that and just put it in front of you as an action item to give you something to react to, but without a specific staff recommendation.
Yeah, I think the only other piece I would just say is looking at all these cities on here, probably Merriam, Rowan Park make the most sense for like an apples to apples-ish comparison. Just everything else is sort of a different vibe than what we have here in Mission. So
Yes.
can't believe I just said vibe, but different external factors per se. All right, that takes us to our department updates now. Ms. Smith, are there any updates for our committee this evening?
T-minus 6 days to holiday family adoption giveaway. This is part 2 of what we kicked off in Thanksgiving. So kudos to all of our residents, neighbors, and council for each of you and your generous donations. We've almost equaled what we received last year in terms of donations. So now we're gathering in all of the actual gifts that are purchased and pre-wrapped, and our volunteers are busy wrapping this entire week. So the last day for all of the Giving Tree tags is this Friday, and then that's when the rubber hits the road. This weekend, we'll start preparing this section here for all of the gift giving, and then on Tuesday, that's when we'll stage all the food giving. So we have 105 families in need this winter, and we had 103 in Thanksgiving. So a little bit of an uptick, and we've got all of the elements coordinated and all the volunteers in place, and invite you to participate if and when you have any opportunities on Tuesday. But thank you for all that you've done this far.
I just want to say a quick reminder that for all those people that are doing good work, providing gifts to those in need, there are certainly members in our community here trying to take that joy away. Yesterday had a porch pirate ring kind of go through town, and we were luckily able to apprehend them and get the packages to the right owner. But just a reminder to keep an eye on your neighbors to when they have packages sitting out in front of their residence, and if you see anything suspicious, give us a call right away. Thanks.
I wanted to give a quick update on our projects, our Fox Ridge project. If you've been down there, JCW is working on that, the north side, the north lane. So that's been closed down, and actually haven't received a lot of complaints about traffic control. So that's good. We're frantically trying to get Fox Ridge final plans from GBA, review them, get easements, and bid it in January. So we're really anxious, you know, with the economy and where we are with our prices. So we're frantically working on that. Brent's done a great job. He's reached out to everybody. We need to get 9 easements, and he's obtained 3 already. So far it's looking good. As far as the street project, we're trying to finalize that as well. We have 4 streets. If you'll recall, the 61st Terrace, Riggs, 53rd Riggs north of 53rd Street, that little section of 50th Terrace from 51st down to Outlook, and Beverly Avenue from 57th to 56th Street. So working on that, trying to get our costs, and hopefully we'll bid those in January, the latest at February, so we can begin next year with our projects. So, thank you.
I noticed that the guardrails looks like on Lamar and Fox Ridge have been replaced.
Oh, I
Really?
Yeah, they weren't all dented in or anything. So I was wondering if you,
I just
do
went
you have
by
anything
them.
set up on FanDuel for betting on when they're gonna be crushed in again?
Well. It's usually about a week. I didn't even notice they're fixed.
Is it a sport? Does it count as sports betting now legal
Yeah,
in Kansas?
Right.
Kristen, just as a point of clarification, do you mean the highway ones where they're just gone? Those?
That's the ones I
Those are
thought.
still gone.
Oh, okay, not those. I was gonna get
Oh,
really
that-
excited.
Those are the ones you're talking about? Cause that's what I thought you meant. Oh, yeah, that one's we fixed that last year and nobody's hit it since then. I don't know why. But I thought you meant the ones on the highway. Yeah. Yeah. That one's scary because you could go off. I don't know why they're not fixing it, but anyway, thank you. It's bad. Thank you.
The only thing, so next week we'll have our council meeting, our last council meeting of the year. And at that council meeting, we will be the mayor will be putting forth recommended appointments to all of our boards and commissions. I think most of you, maybe you were aware, I think we've talked about this, but this year we used a slightly different process. And we invited everyone who was up for reappointment if they expressed an interest in being reappointed. And the mayor and I have spent time on 3 different occasions meeting individually with all of those folks. And it's been a really positive experience to be face to face. But because of the pandemic, many of them have not met or had an opportunity to meet with you or the mayor in person. And so it was just at least, and I can't speak for the mayor, but for me, has been a very energizing experience to just remember that we have this tremendous group of volunteers who are very passionate about the same things that we're all very passionate about. So it's been great, but those will all be included on next week's agenda. Also, I just didn't want to touch, so we will be closing the bond issue that was approved and the sale that was approved earlier this evening before the end of the year. So we'll have those funds in hand as we kick off the Fox Ridge project and other things. We have design proposals for Waterworks Park that were returned last week, and Penn has been setting up interviews with those firms. So we'll be interviewing those firms the first week of January and bring you a recommendation to get started on the design. So we're anxious to kick off those park improvements. And I think that's all we have for this evening.
Wonderful. Yes, Councilmember Green.
I have a process question, and if it can't be done, that's fine. As we look into January and the new year, is it possible, because we've been doing this for 23 years I've been on now. Is it possible to construct an agenda that people coming in from the outside can all be put at the beginning so we don't have to go through and every single time a committee chair has to say, okay, I'm moving this one up. Can we please have everybody? Can we just have all the outside people at the top of the agenda? Is that possible?
We can try that. The challenge, I mean, I think we do try to do that. This one we probably could have moved up. Just depends on the needs of the presenter. We always try to communicate with the presenter where they are. The bigger challenge that we have is depending on who's coming for which committee meeting because of the 2 separate committee meetings. And so we really try to communicate and give people the shortest window of time within. And the beauty of texting now is, particularly if they're participating virtually, is they can be going about their business and we'll give them a heads up when it's time. But we can certainly always do a better job of managing that, but it's just a little bit tricky sometimes. Yeah. No, it's uncomfortable sometimes, but most of these folks come to a lot of city council meetings and here and other places. And so they know what to expect, but we can certainly always keep an eye out for that.
And one more, I just want to thank staff. I mean, I've never seen staff stretch so far and have so much patience. I had a meeting with Brian last week and his desk is, I mean, it looks like when I worked at EPA, I had stuff everywhere. Every staff person that we have has just gone above and beyond, and I commend their patience, their diligence, their integrity, and their professionalism, because they make this city look awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I know that means a lot, and I would certainly echo that. It's been a long, the pandemic created some unique circumstances for us. But this year, I think has been one of, in terms of just workload, one of the most challenging for across the board for all of our departments that I've seen in the 17 and a half years that I've been here. So we're very fortunate to have the people that we do, and the support of the governing body to do what we do. But I think we're all ready to take a break on 2022 and have maybe just a little tiny bit of a breather before we jump into 2023.
Amen to that. It is now 8:31 PM, and with no further discussion, that concludes this meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you very much.